the scream of pain followed by the sound of glass shattering against the floor. Emily Bennett watched in horror as the crimson stain spread across her white blouse, blood from her own finger, cut by the restoration tool. But it wasn't the wound that made her tremble, it was the drop of red ink that had fallen onto the centuries-old canvas in front of her, a masterpiece that now seemed ruined by a moment of distraction. In that fateful instant, while her heart still pounded erratically from the accident, the workshop bell rang. Emily lifted her eyes toward the door, seeing through the frosted glass the imposing silhouette of a man. For a brief moment she considered not answering. She was a mess, both she and her work. But there was something about the figure's posture, a silent urgency that compelled her to act. "One moment, please," she called, pressing a handkerchief against her wounded finger while trying to calm her breath. Fate sometimes chooses the most inconvenient moments to change our lives, and that moment, though she didn't know it yet, would be the catalyst for an irreversible transformation. Marcus Ashworth entered the studio as if he were an apparition materialized from Emily's very dreams. Tall, with an air of ancient nobility that seemed out of place in the modern world, his dark eyes immediately took in the chaos before him. Instead of stepping back as many would have done, he advanced with feline grace, pulling a silk handkerchief from the pocket of his impeccable suit. "Allow me," his voice was deep and melodic, with an accent that hinted at distant origins. Without waiting for a response, he took Emily's injured hand, wrapping it with a gentleness that contrasted with his imposing presence. True talent should not bleed for art, even if art sometimes demands sacrifice. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, not from his touch, but from the way his eyes seemed to see right through her, as if they could read every secret hidden in her heart. I was working on a delicate restoration," she explained, gesturing toward the stained canvas. "Now nothing is ruined until we abandon the hope of fixing it," Marcus interrupted gently, his eyes now fixed on the damaged canvas. "In fact, Miss Bennett, it is precisely your ability to repair the seemingly irreparable that brings me here today." He pulled an old photograph from the inner pocket of his suit, its edges worn from years of constant handling. The image showed a work of art that made Emily catch her breath, a piece that defied logic in its complexity and beauty, combining elements from different cultures into an impossible harmony. "This piece," Marcus began, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "carries with it not only artistic value but the weight of generations of history. It was lost, or perhaps stolen is a more accurate word, many years ago. Recently, I discovered that it may be here in this city. I need someone with your unique skills to restore it once we find it." Emily studied the photograph with eyes trained by years of dedication to her craft. There was something about the piece that seemed to call to her, as if the very pigments held secrets that only she could unravel. "Why me?" she finally asked, lifting her eyes to meet Marcus's intense gaze. "There are more experienced restorers, more?" "Because you see beyond the surface," he interrupted, leaning slightly forward. The movement brought with it a fragrance of sandalwood and mystery. "Your past works show an understanding that goes beyond technique. This piece, it needs someone who can understand its soul, not just its form." The silence that followed was electric, charged with unspoken possibilities. Emily felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, looking at a horizon that promised far more than a simple restoration. Marcus Ashworth was not just a client. There was something in his eyes, in his presence, that suggested a riddle far deeper. "How much time do we have?" she asked, surprising herself with the decision implicit in her words. "Less than I'd like," Marcus replied, a hint of urgency coloring his voice for the first time. "Let me make a proposal. Work with me exclusively on this project. I can provide all the necessary resources, all the contacts you need. In exchange, I ask for your full dedication to this search." Emily looked at her bandaged finger, the blood stain on her blouse, and the damaged canvas that moments ago seemed like a catastrophe. Now, all these elements seemed part of a larger design, as if the universe had orchestrated that exact moment for her transformation. "Why the rush?" she asked, her gaze fixed on him. "What secrets does this piece hold to make it so urgent?" Marcus stood up and walked toward the window. The setting sun enveloped him in a golden halo, and for a moment, Emily saw something in his profile that made her catch her breath, a carefully guarded vulnerability, an ancient pain that echoed the very complexity of the work they were seeking. "There are stories, Emily, that need to be told at the right moment. This piece, it's more than art. It's a key to a past that must be confronted, a story that needs to be completed before it's too late." When their eyes met again, Emily knew her life was about to change irrevocably. The sun sank below the horizon, painting the studio in shades of gold and crimson, as two souls began a dance that would lead them down paths neither could predict. "I accept," she said simply, and her words echoed in the space between them like a promise sealed not with ink, but with something much deeper, fate weaving its invisible threads into a pattern that only time would reveal completely. Marcus smiled then, a smile that transformed his face and made Emily's heart skip a beat. It was as if a mask had fallen, revealing, if only for a brief moment, a soul that perfectly matched the complexity of the piece they sought. That night, after Marcus left, leaving behind only the scent of sandalwood and the photograph of the mysterious artwork, Emily remained in her studio late into the night, her fingers tracing the contours of the image as her mind danced with possibilities. The cut on her finger pulsed softly, a physical reminder of the moment her life had changed forever. Outside, the ancient city slept beneath a sky painted with stars, unaware of the drama that was beginning to unfold in its historic streets. Emily didn't know it then, but that night would mark the beginning of a journey that would test not only her skills as a restorer but also her ability to trust her own heart, and the mysteries that fate sometimes places in our path. Morning arrived, heavy with anticipation, bringing with it a different light that seemed to tint the world with new meanings. Emily woke before the alarm, her hands still trembling slightly as they touched the bandage on her finger. The photograph of the mysterious artwork remained on her nightstand, a silent reminder that the previous night had not been just a dream. The studio, her refuge for so many years, seemed different that morning. The restoration tools, the brushes meticulously organized, the paints carefully catalogued, everything seemed to be waiting for the beginning of something extraordinary. Emily ran her fingers over the damaged canvas from the day before, now a silent witness to the moment that had changed her life. Precisely at 9 o'clock Marcus arrived. This time he was not alone. An elegant woman accompanied him, her sharp eyes surveying the space with professional interest. "Emily, allow me to introduce Alexandra Crawford, an art expert who has been instrumental in our search." Marcus made the introductions with his usual grace. Alexandra extended a hand with perfectly manicured nails. "Marcus told me you have a unique talent for seeing beyond the superficial layers." Her voice was soft, but carried a note of caution that didn't escape Emily's notice. "We'll be needing that skill very much." The three gathered around Emily's work table, where Marcus began to unfold old maps and yellowed documents. "The piece we're looking for," he began, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "is not just a work of art. It is a testament to love, sacrifice, and redemption that spans generations." Emily watched as he traced invisible lines over the maps, connecting points that seemed random but, in his hands, began to form a coherent pattern. Alexandra occasionally added technical information, her words as precise as surgical scalpels cutting through layers of mystery. "The last time the piece was seen publicly," Alexandra explained, "was during a private exhibition 15 years ago. After that, it simply disappeared." Her eyes met Marcus's for a moment, a silent communication passing between them. Emily noticed the subtle tension in Marcus's shoulders when that specific date was mentioned. There was a story there, buried under years of silence and restrained pain. "What happened at that exhibition?" she asked softly, her eyes fixed on Marcus's tense profile. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken memories. Marcus stood up, walking toward the window as he had the day before. The morning light highlighted the lines of worry on his face, making him momentarily vulnerable. "There was a fire," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "The exhibition was at my family's house. We lost much more than art that night." Alexandra gently touched Marcus's arm, a gesture that spoke of years of shared friendship and understanding. "The piece survived," she continued the story, "but during the chaos of the evacuation, it disappeared. For years we thought it had been destroyed until rumors started to surface," Marcus finished, turning to Emily with an intensity that made her hold her breath. "Whispers in the right circles, clues leading to more clues. And all of them point to this city." Emily absorbed every word, every nuance of expression. Her training as a conservator had taught her to notice the smallest details, and now that skill extended beyond works of art. There were layers of meaning in every unspoken word, in every exchanged look between Marcus and Alexandra. "The piece," she began hesitantly, "in the photograph, there are elements in it that seem impossible to coexist. As if it was created by someone who knew secrets lost to time," Marcus finished, a sad smile playing on his lips. "My family has kept this piece for generations, Emily. It's more than just a work of art, it's a legacy, a promise that must be fulfilled." Alexandra opened her briefcase, pulling out more documents. We have reason to believe that the piece is being kept somewhere within the old city. The evidence suggests it moves location periodically, but always within a specific radius. As they leaned over maps and documents, Emily felt a growing energy in the air, as if the very universe was conspiring to bring their destinies together. Hours passed like minutes, each new piece of information adding to the puzzle that was beginning to take shape. It was in the middle of the afternoon, when the sunlight cast dancing patterns through the atelier windows, that Emily noticed something peculiar on one of the old maps. These markings, she pointed to almost imperceptible symbols on the edges, seemed to follow a specific pattern. Marcus and Alexandra quickly approached, their eyes wide with the discovery. "How did you?" Alexandra started, but Marcus interrupted her with a gesture. "I told you she had a gift for seeing beyond the obvious," he murmured, his eyes meeting Emily's with a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something that made her heart race. In that moment, a ray of sunlight hit Marcus's face at a specific angle, and Emily noticed something that had escaped her attention before, a thin, almost invisible scar that stretched from his temple to his jaw. A reminder of the fire, perhaps? Or of some other event still buried beneath layers of secrets. The afternoon turned into night without anyone noticing, the hours marked only by the progress of their discoveries. When they finally decided to call it a day, Emily felt as though she had lived a lifetime in those few hours. "Tomorrow," Marcus said as they prepared to leave, "we'll start following the clues you uncovered. Are you ready for this, Emily?" She looked around her atelier at the restoration tools that had been her constant companions for so many years. Now they seemed like symbols of a past life, a life that was about to transform into something much greater. "I'm ready," she answered, her words carrying the weight of a decision that went far beyond the search for a lost work of art. After they left, Emily remained in her atelier for a long time, her fingers tracing the pattern she had discovered on the map. The mystery of the lost piece was beginning to intertwine with the enigma that was Marcus Ashworth, creating a web of questions that demanded answers. That night, in her dreams, Emily saw flames dancing in ancient hallways, heard screams muffled by time, and felt the weight of secrets waiting for the right moment to be revealed. When she woke, her hands were still trembling with the intensity of the visions, but her heart was firm in her decision. The search had only just begun, and Emily Bennett was about to discover that some works of art carry much more than pigments and techniques. They carry stories that can change lives forever. The weeks that followed transformed not only Emily's atelier but the very essence of her existence. The space that had once been her solitary sanctuary for restoration now pulsed with a different energy, filled with old maps, historical documents, and most significantly, the constant presence of Marcus Ashworth. The walls that had witnessed years of meticulous solitary work now held whispers of discoveries, exchanged glances, and unspoken promises. Every morning Marcus arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, bringing 2 coffees, one for himself and one for Emily with that pinch of cinnamon she so loved. It was a simple gesture, but one that carried an intimacy that made her heart race. It was in these quiet moments, before Alexandra arrived with her practical efficiency and her folder full of new documents, that Emily began to truly know the man behind the mission. "My mother always said that art is the language of the soul," Marcus commented one of those mornings, his fingers gently tracing the contours of the photograph they had come to know so well. The soft light of dawn streamed through the tall windows of the atelier, casting a golden halo around him. "She used to take me to galleries when I was a child, not to see the works but to feel their stories." Emily lifted her eyes from her work, captured by the vulnerability in his voice. "What do you mean?" "She made me sit in front of a painting for hours," he continued, a nostalgic smile softening his features. "Not to study the technique or memorize dates but to listen. Every brushstroke is a word," she'd say, "every color is an emotion, every texture is a memory." His voice trembled slightly. "She taught me that art isn't just something to be seen, but something to be felt, lived." Emily felt her throat tighten with the emotion in those words. "She sounds like an extraordinary woman," she said softly, resisting the urge to reach out and touch his hand. "She was." Marcus stood up and walked over to the window. "She was the one who saved the piece that night, you know? During the fire." He paused, his hands clenching into fists. "Everyone said to leave it, that it was just a work of art, that it wasn't worth the risk. But she knew, she always knew that piece held more than just paint and canvas." The silence that followed was heavy with untold stories, with pain still unhealed. Emily waited, her heart aching for the anguish she saw reflected in Marcus's tense posture. "She managed to retrieve the piece," he continued finally, his voice barely a whisper. But the price was too high. The fire? His voice faltered, and Emily watched as a solitary tear slid down his face before he quickly wiped it away. At that moment, Alexandra entered the atelier, bringing with her her characteristic energy, but something in her expression had changed. There was an urgency in her movements that immediately alerted Emily. "We found something," Alexandra announced without preamble, spreading new documents across the work table. The contrast between her precise movements and the emotional atmosphere still lingering in the air was almost palpable. A transfer record dated 3 months after the fire. The piece was moved through a network of private galleries, always kept away from the public eye. Emily forced herself to focus on the documents, though her mind was still partially trapped in the vulnerability she had witnessed moments before. Her years of training in restoration had sharpened her attention to detail, allowing her to notice nuances others might miss. "These watermarks," she pointed, leaning over the papers, "there's something off about them." Marcus leaned in closer, his arm brushing lightly against hers as he peered over the table. The contact, though brief, sent a shiver down Emily's spine and made her heart skip a beat. "Off how?" "It's like someone was trying too hard to make them look authentic," she explained, reaching for one of her precision lenses. The familiar weight of the tool in her hands helped her focus. "See these fibers here? In authentic documents from the period, they follow a specific pattern due to the papermaking process. But these? It's as if someone studied the pattern and tried to replicate it, but made subtle errors in the details." Alexandra exchanged a meaningful look with Marcus. "This confirms our suspicions. The transfer was forged, but why? And more importantly, by whom?" Emily continued to study the documents, but she was painfully aware of Marcus's proximity, the warmth radiating from his body, the soft scent of sandalwood she had learned to associate with his presence. In the past few weeks, she had developed a heightened sensitivity to his mood changes, learning to read the unsaid in the silences between them. "There's more," Alexandra continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "We managed to trace a pattern in the movements of the piece. It always reappears at specific times as if it's following some kind of hidden calendar. A calendar that only makes sense to those who know its true story," Marcus added, running a hand over his face in a gesture Emily had learned to recognize as a sign of deep concern. Then something clicked in Emily's mind, a connection that had been there all along, waiting to be discovered. "The symbols on the map," she said, pulling out the old document they had studied weeks before. Her hands trembled slightly with the excitement of the discovery. "They're not just geographical markings, they're dates. And not just any dates." Marcus and Alexandra turned to her with renewed interest as Emily explained her theory, her fingers dancing over the map as she connected points that had once seemed random. "Look, if we consider the pattern of the seasons and the position of the stars marked here, these markings aren't random. They follow a cycle that is about to complete again." As she spoke, a new light began to shine in Marcus's eyes, replacing the shadow of sadness that had been there moments before. "Emily," he said her name like a prayer, with a reverence that made her heart falter for a beat, "you are absolutely brilliant." Alexandra was already on the phone, making calls and confirming details, while Marcus remained beside Emily, his eyes fixed on the map as if he could extract more secrets just by the sheer force of his will. "We need to prepare," he said finally, his voice carrying a mix of hope and apprehension. "If you're right, and something tells me you are, we have only a few days before the piece reappears." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. But there was something more, something that made her heart race when she thought about the implications of her discovery. Every step they took toward the lost piece seemed like a step toward a destiny she couldn't yet fully comprehend. That night, after Marcus and Alexandra left, Emily stayed in the studio until late, poring over every document, every detail they had uncovered. Her finger, now fully healed from the accident that had marked the beginning of this journey, traced the contours of Marcus's face in an old photograph he had left behind, unnoticed, an image that showed him as a young man, beside a woman with a gentle smile and deep eyes that could only belong to his mother. The resemblance between them was striking, not only in their physical features but in the way they both seemed to carry an inner light that transcended the mere image. The photograph confirmed what her heart had already known. This search was much more than just recovering art. It was a journey of healing, of redemption, and perhaps, though she barely dared to admit it to herself, of love. Outside, the ancient city slept beneath a starry sky, unaware of the drama unfolding in its historic streets. Somewhere, hidden in the shadows, a work of art waited to be rediscovered, carrying with it not only the history of a family but also the promise of a future that Emily Bennett was only beginning to glimpse. A future that, she was starting to realize, was inextricably linked to the man who had entered her studio that fateful afternoon, bringing with him mysteries, pain, and the possibility of a love that could transcend even the deepest scars of the past. The discovery Emily made had a palpable effect on the atmosphere in the studio. The following days were filled with a feverish urgency as the three of them worked tirelessly to decode the full pattern she had identified. But for Emily, the most significant change wasn't in the maps or documents. It was in the way Marcus looked at her now, as though she were not only an ally in his quest but an unexpected light in his personal darkness. On a particularly exhausting afternoon, when Alexandra had gone out to run some errands, Marcus surprised Emily with a confession that would change everything. "There's something I need to show you," he said, pulling an old journal from his briefcase, its pages yellowed with time and stained with what seemed suspiciously like old tears. "This was my mother's journal. I've never shown it to anyone, not even Alexandra." Emily felt the weight of the trust placed in her as she took the journal with trembling hands. The worn leather cover held a warmth of its own, as if it contained not just words but the very spirit of the one who had written them. "On the night of the fire," Marcus continued, his voice low and intense, "my mother wasn't just trying to save a piece of art. She was trying to preserve a promise made generations ago." He stepped closer, his familiar sandalwood scent wrapping around Emily like a warm embrace. "Read the entry from October 15th. Emily opened the journal with careful reverence, her skills as a restorer automatically noting the signs of deterioration on the pages. The handwriting was elegant yet firm, revealing a strong personality behind the words. "My dear Marcus turned 16 today. How I wish your father were here to see the man you are becoming. The piece calls stronger every day, I can feel its power growing as the time draws near. Thomas always said it had a life of its own, a consciousness born from the stories it carries. Now I understand what he meant. The responsibility weighs heavier with each passing day. If something happens to me, I need to be sure Marcus understands. He must know that our family are not just guardians, we are part of the very history we protect. My mother wrote this 3 days before the fire," Marcus said softly, his words heavy with suppressed emotion. "She knew, somehow she knew something was about to happen." Emily looked up from the journal, meeting Marcus's gaze, filled with vulnerability. "What happened to your father?" she asked gently. Marcus moved away, walking to the window, his usual refuge when emotions threatened to spill over. "He disappeared when I was 5. He was found dead weeks later, under circumstances that were never fully clarified. The last time he was seen, he was investigating rumors about an organization that was supposedly trying to locate the piece." The silence that followed was thick with implications. Emily felt her heart tighten at the evident pain in Marcus's posture. "That's why your mother was so protective of the piece? She devoted her life to keeping it safe, not just because of its artistic or historical value, but because—" his voice faltered. "Because it was her connection to your father," Emily finished softly, finally understanding the depth of Marcus's commitment to this quest. He turned to her then, and there were unspilled tears in his eyes. "The piece isn't just a work of art, Emily. It's the legacy of an entire family marked by love, sacrifice, and—" he hesitated, "and tragedy." Emily stood up, moved by an impulse she couldn't contain. She slowly approached Marcus, as if afraid that sudden movements might break the fragility of the moment. When she was close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, she extended her hand and gently touched his arm. "You're not alone in this quest anymore," she said with a firmness that surprised them both. Marcus covered her hand with his, and the contact sent waves of electricity through Emily's body. For a moment they stood like that, connected not only by physical touch, but by something much deeper, a mutual understanding that transcended words. The moment was interrupted by Alexandra's return, who entered the studio with an expression that immediately alerted both of them. "We have a problem," she announced, spreading new documents on the table. "We're not the only ones following these leads. There are others looking for the piece and they're very close." Marcus reluctantly let go of Emily's hand, shifting his attention to the papers Alexandra had brought. "What did you find?" "Suspicious activity at several private galleries in the city. People asking questions, offering obscene amounts of money for information." She paused significantly. "And there's more. A familiar name has resurfaced, Harrison Blake." Emily watched as all the color drained from Marcus's face at the mention of that name. His fists clenched involuntarily, and a visible tension coursed through his body. "Blake?" His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Are you sure?" Alexandra nodded gravely. He's in town. And from what I've gathered, he knows about the pattern of the dates. Emily looked from one to the other, feeling like she was missing a crucial piece of the story. Who is Harrison Blake? Marcus and Alexandra exchanged a loaded glance before he answered. Blake was a close friend of my father's. They worked together researching ancient art. He was the last person to see my father alive. The weight of that revelation fell over the studio like a physical shadow. Emily felt her heart race with the implications. Do you think he? We never managed to prove anything, Marcus interrupted, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. But my mother always believed he was involved in some way. After my father's death, Blake disappeared completely. Until now. Alexandra began methodically organizing the documents, her usual pragmatism serving as an anchor for the turbulent emotions filling the room. We need to speed up our plans. If Blake is involved, we don't have much time. Emily returned to Marcus's mother's journal, her hands gently caressing the pages. Maybe there are more clues here, she suggested. Your mother seemed to know far more than she revealed. Marcus nodded slowly, moving closer to her again. You're right. My mother always said that the answers are in the subtext, in the untold stories. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Emily had learned to associate with deep concern. But reading this journal, it's not easy. The memories? I can help, Emily offered softly. If you trust me? The look Marcus gave her was filled with an emotion that made her heart skip a beat. I trust you, Emily. More than you know. Alexandra cleared her throat discreetly, reminding them of her presence. I'll keep tracking Blake's movements. You two focus on the journal. Any mention of dates, places, or specific events could be crucial. As Alexandra left again, Emily and Marcus sat side by side, the journal open between them. The hours that followed were filled with painful discoveries and surprising revelations, each page bringing them closer not only to the truth about the lost piece but also to each other. As the afternoon turned to night, Emily realized there was something inevitable about the way their lives had intertwined. As a conservator, she had always known that some works of art carried stories that transcended time. Now, sitting next to Marcus, deciphering the secrets hidden in the pages of his mother's journal, she began to understand that sometimes these stories had the power to unite not only the past and the present but also hearts that were destined to meet. Blake's presence in the city added an element of urgency to their search, but it also carried the promise of answers long sought. Somewhere between the yellowed pages of the journal and the mysteries of the lost piece lay the key not only to the truth about the past but also to a future that Emily could barely dare to dream of. Marcus's mother's journal revealed itself to be a labyrinth of memories, each page a new corridor of discoveries that led them deeper into the Ashworth family's history. Emily and Marcus spent days immersed in her words, their heads close together as they deciphered the elegant handwriting that told a story of love, loss, and determination that spanned generations. It was on a rainy Thursday that they found the entry that would change everything. The raindrops gently tapped against the atelier windows, creating a liquid curtain that isolated them from the outside world. Marcus read aloud, his voice trembling slightly with the emotion contained in his mother's words. Today Thomas told me the true story of the piece. It is not just a work of art, it is a testament of love that spans generations. Every brushstroke, every layer of paint carries with it the tears and hopes of our family. The unique technique that so intrigues the experts was not an accident or an artistic innovation. It was a necessity born of desperation and love. Thomas says we must protect it not just for its artistic value but because it holds a secret that could change everything. Harrison doesn't understand this. He only sees the monetary value, the prestige. I fear his obsession is leading Thomas down a dangerous path. Emily felt Marcus shudder beside her. This entry was written just a week before my father disappeared. She covered his hand with hers, offering silent comfort. The touch was electric, charged with an intimacy that had been growing between them each passing day. Your mother seemed to sense that something was wrong. She tried to warn my father about Blake, Marcus said bitterly, but he trusted him blindly. They were friends since university, shared the same passion for ancient art. His voice faltered. At least, that's what we thought. Emily turned another page of the diary, and an old photograph slipped out. It showed 3 smiling young people, a woman with bright eyes who could only be Marcus's mother, a man who shared Marcus's strong features and another man, taller and thinner, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Harrison Blake, Marcus confirmed before she could ask, pointing to the third man. This photo was taken the day they first found the piece. It was a joint expedition, my father, Blake, and a team of researchers. But something happened during that trip. something that changed Blake profoundly. Emily studied the photograph with professional attention, her trained eyes catching details that others might miss. There's something strange about this image. The way Blake is positioned a little apart from the others. And his gaze. What's wrong with it? It's not a look of triumph or joy from the discovery. It's possessive. Like he's looking at something he believes is his by right. Before Marcus could respond, the studio door swung open abruptly. Alexandra entered, drenched from the rain and with an expression that sent a chill through Emily. Blake made contact, she announced without preamble. He wants a meeting? Marcus stood up so quickly that his chair almost toppled. How? When? An hour ago. He sent a message through one of the contacts he was monitoring. Alexandra pulled an envelope from her folder. And this was with it? Emily watched as Marcus opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single photograph, old, yellowed, showing a detail of the piece they were searching for. But there was something else, something that made Marcus blanch. That's impossible, he whispered. This photo was taken the day of the fire. Look at the date on the back. Emily stepped closer, her heart pounding. The photo showed a specific detail of the artwork, a pattern she recognized from the documents they had studied. But there was something else in the image, something that made her stomach churn. Reflected in the surface of the piece, the face of Thomas Ashworth was clearly visible. Your father? She began. Was alive when the fire started, Marcus finished, his voice heavy with emotion, part pain, part anger. Blake is telling us he knows the truth about that night? Alexandra moved quickly to the computer. He wants to meet tomorrow night. In the old gallery district? A chill ran down Emily's spine. The gallery district was an old part of the city, full of abandoned historic buildings that had once housed some of the country's most prestigious art houses. It was the perfect place for a meeting no one should witness. It's a trap, she said softly, touching Marcus's arm. He's trying to lure us there. Probably, Marcus agreed, but there was a fierce determination in his voice. But it's also the first real chance we've had to find out what happened that night. What really happened to my father? Emily glanced back at the open diary on the table, at the words from Marcus's mother, which now seemed to carry new meaning. Your mother wrote that the piece holds a secret that could change everything. What if your father discovered that secret? And what if Blake killed him because of it? Alexandra finished the thought no one wanted to voice. The silence that followed was heavy with dark possibilities. Emily watched Marcus walk to the window, his silhouette framed against the rain that continued to fall. There was a tension in his shoulders that made her want to cross the room and hold him in her arms, protect him from more pain. I can't miss this chance, he said finally, turning to face them. I need to know the truth. Then we'll go together, Emily declared, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. You're not alone in this search anymore, Marcus. I won't let you face Blake alone. The look he gave her was filled with such intense emotion that it made her heart skip a beat. For a moment, the rest of the world seemed to disappear, and there was only the connection between them, that silent understanding that had grown day by day. Alexandra cleared her throat gently. We need to prepare. Blake isn't the type to leave loose ends. If he's willing to meet after all these years, it's because he has a plan. Emily nodded, forcing herself to focus on the task ahead. The diary? Maybe there are more clues about what your father discovered. Something that can prepare us for what Blake might reveal. They spent the next few hours immersed in the pages of the diary, each entry now read with new urgency. The rain continued to fall outside, a constant backdrop to their discoveries as the day slowly turned into night. At some point, Emily looked up from the diary and found Marcus watching her with an intensity that made her blush. What is it? You remind me of her, you know, he said softly. My mother. The same determination, the same ability to see beyond the surface. To see the truth in between the lines. The compliment warmed her from the inside, but it also brought with it a weight of responsibility. In just a few weeks, she had become an integral part of this story, this search for truth and justice that had begun long before she was born. The night advanced, and with it grew the certainty that the meeting with Blake would be a turning point in their lives. Emily couldn't help but wonder if they were prepared for the truths he might reveal, or for the lies he might try to make them believe. The night of the meeting arrived, heavy with omens. The rain that had fallen relentlessly throughout the day finally stopped, leaving the old streets covered by a wet sheen that reflected the city lights like thousands of fallen stars. Emily remained beside Marcus in the car, their fingers intertwined in a silent gesture of support as Alexandra drove through the deserted streets of the gallery district. Emily's heart beat in an irregular rhythm against her ribs, not only from the tension of the moment that was approaching, but from the closeness of Marcus. In the past few weeks, he had become more than just the mysterious client who had walked into her studio. He was now a fundamental part of her life, a connection so deep that at times it frightened her. "We've arrived," Alexandra announced softly, parking the car in the shadows of an old Art Deco building. The place Blake had chosen was an abandoned gallery that had once been one of the city's most prestigious. Its broken windows and deteriorating facade were a silent testament to the passage of time. Before they left the car, Marcus held Emily's hand tighter. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "This story, this burden isn't yours." Emily turned to him, her heart overflowing with feelings she could barely contain. "All the great art stories I've ever restored began with someone deciding not to stay silent, not to let time erase what mattered. I'm here because I chose to be Marcus. Because some stories deserve to be told, some truths need to come to light." The look he gave her was filled with such pure raw emotion that it made her breath catch. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze around them, and Emily thought he might kiss her. But the moment was broken by the sound of footsteps approaching on the wet sidewalk. Alexandra was already out of the car, her posture tense like an animal ready to strike. "He's here." Harrison Blake emerged from the shadows like a ghost from the past, tall and thin as in the old photograph, but now with graying hair and deep lines marking his face. His eyes, however, retained the same possessive gleam that Emily had noticed in the photo, cold, calculating, watching everything with a predatory intensity. "Marcus," his voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was something in it that made Emily shiver. "You are the living image of your father. It's like seeing Thomas again." Marcus took a step forward, keeping Emily slightly behind him in a protective gesture that Blake did not miss. "Why now, Blake? After all these years, why decide to show up?" An enigmatic smile played at the older man's lips. "Because time is running out, my young friend. The cycle is almost complete, and there are truths that must be revealed before it's too late." "What truths?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling slightly. "About my father's death?" Blake tilted his head, studying Marcus like a scientist would study a particularly interesting specimen. "Death? Is that what you think happened to Thomas?" The impact of those words was physical. Emily saw Marcus stagger slightly, and instinctively took a step forward, her arm brushing against his in silent support. "What are you talking about?" Alexandra intervened, her voice sharp as steel. "Thomas's body was found." "Was it?" Blake interrupted softly. "Did you see the body? Or did you just accept what the authorities told you?" Emily watched as emotion swept across Marcus's face like waves in a storm. Shock, confusion, hope, and fear, all mixed in an expression of agony that broke her heart. "The photo you sent," Marcus finally said, his voice little more than a whisper. "My father, in the reflection?" "It was taken on the night of the fire, yes," Blake confirmed. "But not before it started as everyone assumed. It was taken afterward." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could hear her own heart pounding, the sound of Marcus's irregular breathing, the distant echo of the city beyond the abandoned district. "Why?" Marcus finally managed to ask. "Why keep this secret for so long? Why let us believe?" "Because your father asked me to," Blake replied simply. "Because he discovered something about the piece, something that forced him to disappear to protect not only the artwork but everyone he loved." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The words in Marcus's mother's diary suddenly took on a new meaning. "The piece carries a secret that could change everything," she murmured. Blake turned his penetrating gaze on her, as if truly noticing her for the first time. "Ah yes, the restorer. Marcus found someone who truly understands, didn't he? Just as your father found his mother." There was something in the way he said those words that made Emily feel exposed, as though Blake could see through all her defenses, straight into her heart, which was beating erratically. "Where is he?" Marcus demanded, taking a threatening step toward Blake. "If my father is alive, where is he?" "Patience, my young friend," Blake raised his hands in a calming gesture. "Your father is exactly where he needs to be, protecting what must be protected. But the time for the secret is running out. That's why I'm here." He pulled an envelope from his pocket, similar to the one he had sent before. "These are coordinates. In 3 days, when the cycle is complete, your father will be there. With the piece." He extended the envelope to Marcus. "But I must warn you, once you uncover the truth, there's no turning back. Some knowledge changes not only who we are but the entire world around us." Emily watched as Marcus took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper seemed to glow under the faint light from the street lamps, as if it contained not only information but also promises of long-sought answers. "Why help now?" Alexandra asked, her voice heavy with suspicion. "After all these years of silence?" Blake smiled again, but this time there was a sadness in his eyes that seemed genuine. "Because I made a promise to Thomas. And because his son found someone who sees beyond the surface, just as he found Elizabeth." His gaze fixed on Emily. "Some stories need the right storyteller to be revealed." With those cryptic words, Blake began to walk away, his footsteps echoing on the wet sidewalk. Before disappearing completely into the shadows, he turned one last time. 3 days, Marcus. Prepare to discover that some truths are more extraordinary than any lie we could create to protect them. The silence that followed his departure was heavy with unspoken possibilities. Emily wrapped her arms around Marcus when she saw him stagger, his legs seemingly unable to bear the weight of the night's revelations. "He's alive," Marcus whispered against her hair, his voice choked. "All these years, my father is alive." Emily held him tighter, feeling his tears soak her shoulder. Alexandra approached, placing a comforting hand on Marcus's back. "We'll find out the truth," Emily promised softly. Together. As they made their way back to the car, the city seemed different around them, as if the very air had changed with the revelations of that night. In 3 days, they would uncover not only the fate of Thomas Ashworth but also the true meaning of the piece that had shaped so many lives. Emily looked at Marcus, his profile outlined against the city lights, and knew that, regardless of what they would discover, her life was irrevocably intertwined with his. After all, some stories have the power to unite not just the past and the present, but also hearts destined to meet. The 3 days following the encounter with Blake passed like a feverish dream. Emily practically moved into the studio, sleeping on the small couch surrounded by stacks of documents and half-empty coffee cups. Marcus rarely left her side, as if fearing she might disappear too if he looked away for too long. On the morning of the 3rd day, while the city still slept, Emily found the last piece of the puzzle hidden between the pages of Elizabeth's diary. It was a letter, folded and sealed, addressed to Marcus with a specific date: today. "Your mother knew," Emily said softly, handing the letter to Marcus. "She knew this day would come." With trembling hands, Marcus opened the envelope. His mother's elegant handwriting danced across the page, each word heavy with love and a long-held truth. "My beloved son. If you are reading this letter, it means the moment your father and I feared has finally arrived. The peace our family has protected for generations is not just a work of art, it is a testament of love that transcends time and even death. Your father discovered the truth about it that fateful night. The unique technique, the impossible pigments, the pattern that seems to change with the light. None of this was created by a single artist, but by generations of lovers separated by fate and brought together by art. The secret your father uncovered was simple and extraordinary. The piece is a portal. Not in the mystical or supernatural sense, but in the most profoundly human way. It connects souls that are destined to meet, even when time and circumstances conspire to keep them apart. Thomas had to disappear to protect this secret. There are people, entire organizations, that would do anything to possess something so precious. But he never abandoned us, Marcus. He has been there, in the shadows, guarding not only the peace but also our family. And now, my son, it is your turn. You have found someone who sees beyond the surface just as your father found me. Emily is more than a restorer, she is the next guardian even if she doesn't know it yet. True love, Marcus, is the greatest work of art that exists. It is the only force capable of transcending time, death, and even our own limitations. With all my love, Mom." When Marcus finished reading, silent tears were running down his face. Emily wrapped him in her arms, feeling her own heart overflow with an emotion she couldn't name. "The coordinates Blake gave us," Alexandra said softly, "lead to an old chapel on the outskirts of the city. It's a place known for its unique acoustics. They say the sounds travel in impossible ways within it." The sun was rising when they reached the location. The chapel, a modest structure made of ancient stone, seemed to glow with its own light in the dawn. And at the entrance, a familiar figure awaited them. Thomas Ashworth had aged, his hair now completely white, but his eyes, the same eyes as Marcus's, shone with a vitality that time had not been able to diminish. Beside him, covered by an ancient cloth, was the piece that had shaped so many lives. "Son," he said simply, opening his arms. The meeting between father and son was like watching years of pain and longing dissolve in a single moment of pure love. Emily felt her own tears flow freely as she watched Marcus hold onto his father like a lost child who had finally found their way home. When they finally separated, Thomas turned to Emily with a smile that was pure gratitude. "You brought her here," he said softly. "Just as Elizabeth brought me." With a deliberate gesture, he removed the cloth that had covered the artwork. Emily felt her breath catch as she finally saw, with her own eyes, the piece that had dominated her thoughts for so long. It was more than a painting. It was a window to the very soul of love. The colors seemed to dance and change as the rising sun touched them, creating patterns that defied logic but made perfect sense to the heart. Each brushstroke told a different story, of love lost and found, of sacrifices made for something greater than the individual, of hearts that recognize each other through time. The unique technique, Thomas explained, his voice soft with reverence, was developed by a couple separated by war centuries ago. They discovered a way to incorporate their memories, their feelings into the paint itself. Each generation of guardians since then has added their own story to the piece, creating a tapestry of love that transcends time. Emily stepped closer to the artwork, her restorer's fingers trembling with the desire to touch, to understand. Marcus stood beside her, his familiar warmth an anchor in the storm of emotions that swept through her. "That's why it needed to be protected," she whispered, finally understanding. "It's not just art, it's a testament to the very existence of true love. And that's why it needed guardians who understood its true value," Thomas agreed, looking meaningfully at the intertwined hands of Marcus and Emily. Guardians who knew love not just as an idea, but as a living force. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the chapel in golden light. The piece seemed to pulse with life of its own, each color more vibrant, each pattern more meaningful. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice choked with emotion. Thomas smiled, a smile that carried years of wisdom and love. "Now, my son, the story continues. With new guardians, new loves, new memories to be woven into the fabric of this extraordinary piece." Emily felt Marcus's arm wrap around her waist, pulling her closer. In that moment, looking at the piece that had united so many lives across time, she understood that her own story was just beginning. True love, after all, is the greatest masterpiece that exists. A masterpiece constantly being created, not with paints and brushes, but with hearts that choose, day after day, to see beyond the surface and find the beauty in the spaces between the lines of life. And so, under the rising sun of a new day, Emily Bennett, art restorer, guardian of stories, and now part of a legacy of love that transcended time, discovered that some works of art don't need to be restored. They just need to be protected, loved, and passed on, carrying with them the eternal promise that true love, in all its forms, is the greatest masterpiece of all. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart as much as it touched ours while telling it, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinions are true treasures that motivate us to keep bringing stories that move and inspire. If you're not yet subscribed to the Life Stories channel, now is the perfect time to join our community of true story lovers. Don't forget to leave a like. Each one is a small masterpiece that helps us grow and continue sharing more extraordinary stories with you. Until the next emotional journey.